Hello. Today I want to talk a little bit about museums. Well, not really. Well, a little bit about museums, but more about the kind of careers that somebody with an anthropology background might actually engage in a museum. You may or may not have considered that as a possible career option. Let me tell you a little bit more. What's a museum? Well, we think we know, but actually I'm going to suggest that I challenge your definition by looking at all the possibilities today. It's a public institution, right? It's a place where the public goes. It's a depository for valuables. I mean, they have collections. They are sort of a bank of cool stuff, artifacts, artwork, various mementos, historical reminders, dinosaur bones, just like we see in this picture. It's an institution which serves one or more of these following functions. It's a place to house collections, like I said, cool stuff. It also acts as a research facility. It acts as a conservator, a place that conserves things. It acts as a venue for exhibitions, and as well as an interpretive center and a cultural center. Types of museums. I mean, check out this list. I mean, have you ever really thought about it? Sure, there are academic museums. We don't actually have one on our campus. We do have, on our campus, various little corners that have little collections of this, that, and the other. But some universities actually have whole museums on their campuses. Art museums, botanical gardens, that's a type of museum, or zoos, aquariums, they all collect things, don't they? And they display them for the public. There are children's museums. Now, the interesting thing here, there are those children's museums. Be careful. I went to a children's museum in Lancaster, England once, and with signs everywhere that says, do not touch. There were a museum about childhood, right? About being a child, not one for children, which I thought was really interesting. Anyway, cultural museums, general museums. I would say that, Clark Museum in Eureka is a general museum, one that houses lots of different things. History museums, novelty museums, science museums, park visitor centers. If you've ever been to one of those, they often have displays of various artifacts or cultural things in a sort of museum setting. There are also topical museums of all sorts of topics. There are various kinds of careers that, excuse me, that one might, devote their lives to, or a portion of their lives at museums. And I'm going to introduce you to various categories. This first one is just one of several categories that I want to illustrate. And these jobs would be in the realm of collections and research careers within a museum, or research activities, at least, within a museum. Rarely does one find a job where you do nothing but research. So a curator would be part of this group. And a curator is going to be responsible for a particular collection. A small museum, they're responsible for the entire collection. A large museum, it might be just one area of the museum. Oral historian compiles recorded collections in a museum. A researcher investigates objects in the collection of a museum. And a scientist or lab technician is a research at researcher at a science museum. This next slide I'm going to show you is going to talk about these careers, but the sorts of activities that one or duties one might expect to do within these particular careers that I've just mentioned here. So somebody within this category might be one who travels the world collecting fossils for a museum of science and nature. That person might be one who collects oral histories for a project about miners, let's say, in the Southwest. Might be an individual who focuses on the repatriation of human remains and grave goods. And might be one who's in charge of all the artifacts from, let's say, just one section, the Mediterranean, my fave, section of an anthropological or archaeological museum. That's the reason I bring, I think, this particular example up is I worked for the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I worked with the curator and the keeper and various researchers that were all employed underneath, connected to just the Mediterranean section of that museum. But that museum had various other sections that all actually had full staffs, much like ours. Another group of careers would be within the realm of conservation and documentation. The titles of those careers might include archivist or conservator, librarian, media manager, movers, packers, and couriers, a photographer, registrar and collections manager, or veterinarian and animal keeper. I mean, that would depend what kind of museum, correct? A zoo, right, would have the veterinarian animal keeper. These are some of those activities, again, that would be associated with some of those careers that I mentioned on the previous slide. A conservator, for example, might be someone in charge of preserving and repairing specific collections, such as furniture or ceramics, my favorite. A registrar would be one who gathers and stores documentation. Can you hear my cat in the background? Sorry. One who gathers and stores documentation and photographs, as well as legal paperwork for each artifact in the museum. I remember as a graduate student doing my master's degree and contributing to that collection, I'd gained access to a specific collection of ceramics, and my agreement with the museum was that they would allow me to research, investigate, photograph, handle all these artifacts in exchange for copies of my pictures and a copy of any publication or research, culminating, a research project that stemmed from them. So that one museum has lots of slides that I took, as well as my master's thesis. A photographer, yeah, one who's in charge of photographing collections. They might photograph clothing or statuary, lithics, or you know what it is. My favorite, ceramics. Another category of careers would be careers under the umbrella of exhibition and interpretation careers. For that, depending on the museum, an actor might be just the sort of person, somebody perhaps who's dressed in the style of the museum. I remember going to a museum on Hadrian's Wall, and there were actors there dressed up as Roman centurions. One might be a docent, or a tour guide, or a docent coordinator, somebody who coordinates all the docents. I was reading something about a museum down in the Bay Area that had like 300 docents that worked there, and so it was somebody's job to organize all 300. You might be an exhibition designer or a fabricator, people who install things, or audiovisual people, lighting, etc. or they might be a writer. Duties, activities that this category of people might be engaged in. Well, a docent coordinator, like I said, coordinates all volunteers who donate their time to lead school tours. That's right, it was the Oakland Museum I was talking about. I mean, they had about 300 volunteer docents. Wow, I'm just trying to imagine scheduling alone that many people. An exhibit design director is somebody who would work with a curator to exhibit collections. They can also design interactive exhibits, for example, at a children's museum. Not a museum about children, but one in which children are engaged. Oh, sorry, it looks like my formatting's a bit poopy on this one, forgive me. But this is all about categories of careers in education, outreach, and visitor services. These are careers that are working heavily with the public. Examples of positions might be an audience researcher or an educator, a teacher, educational, that's what that would have said, director, events coordinator, public relations director, a publications director and editor, or a website manager, ways that we would communicate with the public. Some of the things they might do, well, work with schools, education office at least, school groups to maximize the educational experience of their visits, scheduling the arrival of giant buses of children, organizing the visit of such a large group. That would be, really an amazing task. Marketing and visitor services. If you're employed in that area, you would promote the museum, and you would staff the front desk, the first line of contact, and or a special events manager would coordinate members' events, openings, weddings, fundraising events held at the museum. A lot of museums take advantage of these things heavily. Again, back to my own experience at the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology at the University of Pennsylvania. It was a beautiful museum, extraordinary old building with big central courtyard in the middle and huge halls. I mean, often there were weddings, and honestly, they survived by renting themselves out to big functions like weddings and other fundraising events or black tie galas and things like that. So, this can be a really sort of important role in a museum, one in which contributes heavily to financial survival. And the last group of careers I want to talk about today are in the realm of administration and support. So careers under this umbrella would include business manager and financial officer, development officer, director, retail shop manager, security staff, superintendent, facilities manager, and operations manager, and perhaps a technology specialist. The director would oversee and train staff and volunteers. Enterprise director oversees the management of the museum shop, the cafe, and other businesses within the museum itself. Development director would be responsible for a staff which solicits gifts that keep the institution functioning. And that's it for now. I'm hoping that I inspired you a little and introduced you to positions that you never even thought about in a museum. We often don't. We visit a place and we're overwhelmed by those collections, which is the point, right? And don't think about the numbers of people and the variety of expertise and positions that go into making these institutions available to the public. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you for listening.